Hey everybody, it's Charlie from Charlie's Flybox, and today I'm going to tie for you a fly that I've gotten a ton of requests for. This fly is um, Tyler Mills' Cowbell Cray. It's a little crawdad crayfish imitation, meant to be fished under an indicator, just dead drift kind of thing. Not to say that you can't strip it, but it's an articulated fly. You can see it's got a jointed body. So it's got some built-in action, and you can kind of just dangle this under an indicator. You know, people don't realize how often crayfish, or how available they are and how often they get eaten by trout. But one of the cool things about this fly is this kind of oddly placed backwards cone, which sort of builds out that flipper tail on the back end of a crawdad. Kind of a unique way to do it. It makes it a nice heavy fly, which is something that you want to have on a crawdad fly. This fly's a little fidgety. It's got a lot of pieces. I was just reading Tyler's bio on this fly on the Umpqua Feather Merchant's website, and he said he came up with this because there were so many more complicated crawdad patterns that had every little piece and part attached to it that could be possible, and he wanted to come up with something that didn't have that. Well, Tyler, you didn't quite get there. It's still pretty fidgety, but you know, far be it from me. I'm all about fidgety, so there's lots of little parts on here. I'll show you how to tie it as best as I've sort of deduced from tying a few of these myself. So we're going to start off with a Gamakatsu octopus hook. This is a size 6, and Tyler ties his on a black hook, and I would tie mine on a black hook also if I had any, but I don't have any black hooks. I only have these blue ones here handy, and I'm going to tie it on blue, and blue kind of goes along with the crawdad tone anyway, and I'm going to tie in all of them. So I'm going to start off with some 72 denier Magpie materials thread in olive dun. I'm going to start this thread just up behind the eye. I've got a few little pet peeves with this fly that I'll kind of point out as we go along. So I'll make a few little adjustments as I go, just because I feel like I need to do that. But I'm going to wrap down around the bend a bit to where I will get started. And I'm going to start off with a couple of Goose Biots. And these are the sort of mouth part antennae pieces. And we're going to tie these in like you would the tails on a prince nymph. So just opposed. If I can get these opposed. So olive biots, about a shank length long. I'm going to take these, I'm going to put them in at the bend, and I'm going to tie them in just like a prince. You can sort of tweak them if need be. And I'm going to wrap over those butt ends. Try to hit that hook point if you can. That'll just fray your thread up, add a little more bugginess to the pattern. A little pro tip, I don't throw those out just every time, but every now and again you get lucky and you get to see one of those. So just a couple of split biots there for the start, and then just a little tuft of olive dyed pheasant tail. So I'm going to pull this out so that those tips become even. And I'm just going to bundle this up in a little bunch and tie this in right on top of that biot tail. About 2/3 of the length, I'll say. Wrap over that, trim those butt ends out. I like to get my thumbnail under there to kind of spread things out. And then here's number 1 in the fidgety category. And you guys know I'm all about eyeballs. But we're going to use a couple little epoxy eyes. I made these out of resin, orange Solarez resin. Melted a little nub on the end of the monofilament. I think this is 20-pound mono. Melted a little nub, dipped it in the orange resin, and then cooked it up. So I've got 2 little eyes. And I'm going to take these and cut them to the same length. And then sort of get my thread back here to the bend. And I'm going to lay them in and get a few turns over them. And then kind of butt them together so that they become the same length. Like so. And then again, I'm just going to use my thumb to kind of bend those out a little bit so they stand out a little further apart. You can see how you can kind of kink that and get 2 nice little eyeballs back there, sort of shrimpy. I like those to be spread out. The factory version, let's see, I've got one here somewhere. That guy's got little tiny red eyes. You could do it that way if you wanted. Crawdad eyes aren't there, and they're not red either, but little hot spot. That's my adjustment. I'm going to make those eyes a little wider spread. They're on the outsides of the carapace, so that's where I'm going to try to get them to line up with. I'm sure it's a matter of zero difference, but that's my thought on it. And now I'm going to take a piece of Mottled Bustard Olive Thinskin. And I'm going to cut this strip. Should have cut this ahead of time for you. I want a fairly wide strip. You know, two-thirds of the gap of the hook. And I'm going to strip it off the paper backing. Make sure I'm not missing any parts here so far. I think I got them all. And I'm going to tie this in on top of the hook and sort of let it wrap around the shank and wrap over it right up to the base of those eyes. Lift that up, make sure you're right up to that point. So we've got that piece of thin skin tied in on top. Now we're going to tie in a piece of olive wire. And you should probably use Brassie for this. I only have, sitting here at my house, handy, I only have small. So I'm going to use small. It works fine. If you got Brassie, it'll work better. Just be a little stronger to pull down. And I'm going to tie that in along my near side here and kind of keep it toward the bottom of the hook just to keep it out of my way. Like so. All right, now I'm going to come in and I'm going to dub a little ball. And in the official recipe, there's some yarn used to build up underneath this, but I'm using some Wapsi Craw dub. Let me grab it here, I'll show you. This is some olive craw dub, but any coarse dubbing would work fine here. But Tyler uses some yarn underneath this to kind of build this up and save you from having to dub so much. I actually have some yarn sitting on my desk, but I'm not really too worried about it. I want to make a nice big ball, and you can see this coarse dubbing I kind of twist down as I go. Make a pretty big ball back here at the bend. And this is going to serve two purposes. It's going to start the body of the fly, but it's also going to act as a spreader for the claws and legs that we're about to put in. So for the claws, I'm going to use an India henback. So this is just your everyday India henback, India hen saddle, dyed olive, or dyed whatever color crawdad you're going to tie. And of course they come in a variety of colors. But I'm going to take 4 feathers, and I try to get them matched up. Let me get a hold of them here, and I'll show you. All right, so there's 2. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to match these up inside to inside, like so. So the pretty side shows on both sides. I'm going to measure those about a shank length long, and then I'm going to strip the bottom a bit so I've got bare stems like so. So that's going to form one claw. So I take that paired set of feathers and just stick it in my mouth and wet it. And I'll set it here on the edge of my desk while I do the same thing with another set of feathers. I'm going to pair these 2 up. Measure them to the same length as the first bunch. Strip those butt ends. And wet those down as well. So now I'm going to take this first set of claws, and I'm going to lay it in along the far side of the hook, and just kind of pinch it in place, and I'm going to come over and get it anchored down right up to that ball of dubbing, like so. I'll take my other set, and you can see if you have these wetted, they stay together pretty well. Just a little old-timey feather wing streamer tying trick. Makes those much easier to manage. And you can see as you wrap closer up to that ball, that starts to spread those claws out. And those claws should sort of elevate up from the hook shank. and then I can kind of just run down over these stems and trim those out of there. Let's check, make sure everything's where I want it to be. Looking pretty good so far. And now, before I dub the main part of the body, I'm going to take an olive dyed grizzly hackle. And this is from a Met's Bugger bunch. These are perfect for things like this, where you maybe don't need a ton of olive dyed grizzly. You don't need to buy a whole cape. And this is a cape feather, a neck feather. But these work really nicely for applications like this. I'm going to take this feather and prep the base end of it. So I've just trimmed off a few little stubs off of either side. And I'm going to tie this in right at the base of these legs. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm not going to tie this in yet. I actually have tied 3 or 4 of these here, sitting kind of warming up, and I've forgot the friggin' legs on most of them. So now I'm going to put in the legs. So I just pre-prepared that hackle feather, and I've set it aside for right now. And now I'm going to tie in the legs. So I've got nymph size olive barred Sili legs, and I'm going to tie these in at the center of their length here, and pull 1 clump to the far side and 2 here to my near side, so that those legs dangle back. And I just clip those back here in my material spring to kind of hold them out of the way while I tie in my pre-prepared hackle. You might have thought I was going to forget or get that out of order. It was just me being efficient. Don't think anything of it. So I'll tie in my grizzly feather. Now a little bit more of that same dubbing. Now one of my pet peeves with this fly is that front hook tapers down to an awfully skinny point there. And I don't love that. So I'm going to fatten this body up a little bit on this front end so we can kind of build a little bit more shape. So fairly heavy application of dubbing, and I did some of these with a dubbing loop, just kind of screwing around, and that actually worked pretty nicely too, and you can kind of pick that out and make it nice and shaggy also. But I'm going to start this dubbing right up here at the back of the claws. I'm going to dub down to just short of the hook eye, and then I'm going to work back and forth a bit. I'm actually going to add a bit more dubbing just to square this up a bit. I don't like that super taper down to the hook eye. It's just doesn't look like a crawdad. He doesn't get skinny. He's not hourglass shaped. He doesn't get skinny in the middle of his body. He's pretty thick. So I'm going to use this coarse dubbing to kind of maintain that shape. And obviously you're always going to taper down some there toward the hook eye because that's just where you're going to end. But I try to alleviate some of that if I can. All right, now we're going to pick up our grizzly feather. And I'm going to palmer wrap this through that dubbing. Fairly heavy. Tie that off just behind the eye. Get a few turns over that. Then I'm going to pick up my Thinskin and pull it over the top and give it just a little tug to kind of tighten it down. Let it buckle around the hook and tie it off behind the eye as well. So we've got that thin skin coming over the back. Now I'm going to pick up my wire, and you want to be a little careful when you do this. And I want to get 1 wrap of wire in front of the claws, and then the next wrap right behind the claws. And I'm just going to work this wire back at evenly spaced turns back through that hackle, right down to the eye of the hook, and then tie it off just behind the eye, and you can helicopter that excess. I caught 1 strand of hackle there, right there, that I'm going to get rid of, and then I'm going to pull this thin skin tight and get the tips of my scissors in there and cut that off as close as I can. I'm going to build up a smooth little thread head to cover all that, and then I'm going to whip finish. So that's the front end of the fly. This is, like I said, this is an articulated fly. That's going to be the front end of him. You can kind of tweak and position things as needed while I'm at it here. Actually, I'm going to leave those legs long just so I can mess with them later. So I'm going to set that aside. And I'm going to pick up a Tiemco 9395. which is a 6X long streamer hook. It's a ring eye. Now, this I would use, I do have some of these, so I'm going to use them, but I would use a cheap ring eye hook. I would not use a high quality hook like this, just because you're going to cut it off, and you got to kind of mess with it a little bit. You want a ring eye, something fairly stout, but that's an awfully good hook to just be cutting off, and they're fairly expensive. So I'm going to take a black tungsten cone, size large. And one of the catches with this is I'm going to put this cone on here backwards, but it won't make the bend backwards because this is an odd shaped hook. So what I'll do is I'm going to put this, you can put it in your vise, and just open up that gap a bit, and then put that cone on. Might have to pinch your barb as well. Put that cone on backwards so it's open end toward the hook eye, like so. And then you can bend that hook gap back closed just to make it easier to tie on in the meantime. All that part's going away, so it really doesn't matter that it's that hook has been bent. We're just going to use about this much, gosh, maybe not even, about yay much of this hook here, so not very much. Now I'm going to start my thread just behind that cone. Now, one thing you want to be aware of when you do this, when you look at the finished fly, is you want the hook eye to stick out of the end of the cone so you can thread your tippet. Don't push that cone all the way up over the hook eye. You'll never be able to tie the dang thing on. So you want to make sure you leave yourself enough space to get that in there without it pushing the cone over the hook eye. And I'm going to say this is about a centimeter, the length of this juncture here. You can see that's behind the cone. There's no thread in front of there just yet. This is another one of those fidgety parts of this fly that we're gonna mess with a little bit. But to attach the front hook to the back hook, I actually tried a bunch of different things. And what is used on there is a girth hitch of white backing. I've got some black backing here, and it just blends in it more. It doesn't, on the factory version, it's white backing, so you got this big white spot in the middle of the fly. It just irritates me. So I'm going to use black backing, and I'm also not going to use a girth hitch. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take one end of this backing and push it there through the cone, and I'm going to start to anchor it down, like so. So I want to anchor that down good and tight. I don't need quite the length I've got here. And then I'm going to take my first portion of the fly, and I'm going to push that backing through, wet that down a little bit, through the eye. So I'm just going to make a loop. Everybody these days, you know, on articulations tries to make it, you know, with wire and super glue and, you know, double it around and go through the hook eye and make it the strongest connection in the world. I never have these things come apart. If you tie them down tightly with your tying thread and put a little super glue on there, that thing ain't coming out. So you don't have to worry about that. So you don't need much there. But I'm going to pull this down to make a short little loop, like so. So just that little loop is going to give us a lot of articulation there. It's going to really let that back end kind of bounce around. That girth hitch is fairly rigid. I actually use that girth hitch a lot when I'm trying to keep the back hook from fouling around on the front hook. In the case of this fly, we don't actually have a hook on the back end. So I'm not really too worried about that. And then I'm going to take the other end and push it forward through the cone, like so. And I'm going to wrap, kind of set my cone up where I want it. You can see I've got the hook eye exposed. Wrap right up to there. You might go back and forth over that a couple of times. And then I'll whip finish. Trim that thread out. Then I'll push that cone back, and I'll just start the thread right again on top of this. And I'm going to wrap over these two strands right up to the hook eye. And you can put these through the hook eye if you really want to. It's a little, again, like I say, it's a little fidgety. What I do is just fold them back on themselves. And this is actually going to help to build some of the bulk we need there to keep that cone from moving forward. You can either even bounce that forward again each piece. You're just trying to make a stop so that that cone will stop short of the hook eye like that. And once we've got those there, We can trim off the extra. Just build a little thread base over the top of it. And then whip finish again. So you can see I just built a little wedge there, just using that backing. Now, good spot to put a little shot of super glue while we're in there. So I'm going to put some super glue on those wraps, top and bottom. This is just Zap A Gap. And then I'm going to take that cone and push it right up to there and kind of get it squared up. Like so. You can see the hook eye is exposed. That's going to be important so you can tie the dang thing on later. Now I'll start my thread again, right back behind here. You do want to make sure that fits, kind of wedges in there. It's not going to slide forward by accident. That cone stays clear of that hook eye. And then we'll come back and we'll pick up that same piece of thin skin. So this is the butt end of that piece of thin skin. And I'm going to cut it just slightly narrower than it was. So I'm going to take my long scissors here and just shave a bit off. So I'm going to make that just a bit narrower. Got a weird end there. I'm going to tie this on top, back here. Make sure you're right up to your junction. And then another piece of wire. I've lost my stub. So same wire, same small size olive wire, Brassie if you got it. I'm going to tie that wire in and anchor it down. All right, now for the abdomen here on this fly, we're going to use some rabbit fur. And you could use just rabbit dubbing and pick it out, but we're going to use rabbit fur from a zonker strip. And this is a grizzly variant, olive grizzly variant rabbit strip. You can see it's got some black tips on it. You know, something that kind of matches the color, the overall color of the fly. This could maybe be a little darker, but this will work just fine. And I'm going to make a dubbing loop. And it doesn't need to be very long. And then in the case of the 72 denier thread, I'm going to go through twice. So I just made a double strand dubbing loop. Take my thread around the base of it. So you can see I've got 4 strands of thread there. And that's just because I'm using fairly light thread, and I'm going to twist this up pretty good. That's just a handy little tidbit for later should you need that on a different fly somewhere along the way. That's how you do that. And then I'm going to take a clump of rabbit off of this hide, and I'm just going to cut it clean off the hide, right as close to the hide as I can, like so. You can see what I've got there. I'm going to pick up my dubbing loop. I'm going to put this fur between the strands, kind of spread it out a little bit. And I like to sort of gauge the length. I'm going to use the tip ends here on the long side. These butt ends, I don't want too many of those, so I can come in again with my long scissors and trim those out of there. People always ask how I make that look so easy, trimming that out. I'll tell you the secret to it while I spin this up to furl this rabbit fur into a chenille. The secret to it is a good, sharp pair of scissors. It's not any magical skill there. It's having a pair of scissors that will actually grab and cut what you need it to cut. These are Renamid FS8s, I think is what these are. This is a round tip, long bladed, serrated scissor. Great for jobs like that. If you ever remember watching This Old House and Norm building all that cool stuff back in the day, if you're of that age, you know, my dad used to say, you know, it'd be really easy to build all that stuff if you had every tool in the world. Well, when you have all the right tools, it is easy to build stuff. So the right scissors for the job make a huge difference. So I'm going to wrap this rabbit fur right up to the back of the cone, and you don't need a ton of it, right up to the back of the cone, and tie off on bare thread just behind the eye and trim that out. And then I'll use my dubbing brush. This is a stainless steel dubbing brush. Brass brush would work fine here as well. And I'm going to part this hair, and I'm going to pull the thin skin over the top to form, let me turn this so you can see it, to form a shell back over the top there. And you want to make sure that you don't grab too much of the hair while you do this. And I'll tie it down just behind the cone as well. And then I like to sort of stand this up, run the brush through it a couple more times before I pick up my wire, and I'm just going to rib through that fur. You can see if you wet your finger a bit, you can kind of pull down anything you catch. Rib through that fur a few times to create that abdominal section, and then tie that wire off just behind that coat. Same process as before, just helicopter that wire off. 685 turns. Come on, get out of there. There it goes. And then I'm going to trim that thin skin out. And I try to trim that as clean and flush as I can. Square your cone up again, make sure it's not pushing. Nice clean thread head over those stub ends. This Magpie thread is a really flat polyester thread. It makes really nice smooth thread heads. Really clean there. And then I'm going to whip finish and trim that thread out. You can give it another quick little brush to clean that up. Kind of smooth things back here. Loosen up anything you may have bound down with the wire. But you can kind of see the overall shape of that. Kind of that back end kind of bleeding in. It also covers that juncture a bit. So it makes a nice clean connection between the two. While we've got this sitting up here, we're going to trim these Sili legs just a bit longer than the claws, like so. And then we're going to come in with a cutter and cut this long hook off just as close as we can get it. And I've got to kind of do this where I can see it, so you're just going to have to trust me. Look away when you do that so you don't stab that in your eye. And you can see I've cut that off. I actually need to cut that off a little shorter. I might be able to do this where you could see it now. Yeah. So I'm going to take my cutters. Like so. And you can see that loop connection really allows that piece to sort of flip and flop around. A lot more articulation in that connection. And that's super secure. That ain't going nowhere, as the rest of us dads like to say. But that's the Cowbell Craw, Cowbell Cray. I fished this first time a few years ago up in Wyoming, and worked surprisingly well. Kind of a cool little fly. All said and done, I've got, I got a half dozen that I've whipped up that I'll put in my box, and certain spots that can be the fly of the day. Like I say, it's overlooked how available crawdads are to trout. Not to say this doesn't work well for bass, but this is a trout fly. Something that's often overlooked. It's hard to kind of get it here where you can see it sitting just right. Give you a nice profile of it. There you go. That's about as good as we're going to get. But pretty creepy crawly little bug with an articulation in the middle, so it's got some movement. That tail flips up and down. Pretty cool idea on the backward cone. Just sinks that sucker down, gets it where it needs to be, and it's heavy. So that's first and foremost. That one came out pretty good. I like it. I'm proud of it. Nice job, Tyler. I like it. Tie some up. Take them out. Throw them in the water. Reel in the fish. Take a picture. Wet your hands. You'll have friends comment and tell you how great you are. I don't know. And if they don't, let me know. I'll tell you how great you are. Good job. Hope you go tie some of those. Hope you enjoy them. I like it. Thanks for watching. I'm Charlie.